Yeah, everyone loves a good old-fashioned public display of wanton violence. But when a couple of pubescent high school super soldiers try to knock the pimples off each other's faces, well, that's something special, isn't it? Take Spider-Man for instance. You know the story, it's a tale as old as time. A nerd falls in love, nerd gets rejected for, being a nerd. Nerd gets bitten by a radioactive insect. Nerd punches his high school bully with the proportionate speed and strength of a spider. This whole fight scene empowered a generation to imagine that they too might be able to hook up with Kirsten Dunst if they could only just figure out a way to inject themselves with radiation. Turns out that's not a good idea for the vast majority of people. But hey, at least we now know how Dunst ended up marrying Jesse Plemons. Here's a fact, The Karate Kid is a classic of the nerd revenge fantasy genre. Yeah, there's a reboot with Hilary Swank or Jaden Smith reboots, but when it comes to kids bashing each other's sinuses back into place, nothing is as good as the OG. Anyone born after, say, 1980 has a karate GI buried in their parents' basement, somewhere under a pile of Beanie Babies. Alas, what The Karate Kid didn't show was that it takes years to get good at martial arts. So join us while we pour one out for all the kids who stood up to their bullies after taking one self-defense class at a strip mall. The Karate Kid universe is full of great teen fights. There are so many damned epic, and I mean epic, high school fights in this show. It might as well be called Karate High or something. Seriously, if we didn't talk about a Cobra Kai fight scene, we'd be laughed off the internet. And then we'd have to go back to passing out these lists on the street like people used to do before YouTube.
Hey, what happened?
When it comes to white women fixing racism through poetry, no movie does it like Dangerous Minds. It also left us with this truly magnificent high school brawl. It joins the white lawyer fixes the racist prison system through the power of justice and white coach fixes racial poverty through the power of sports genres to create a kind of white savior oeuvre. A filmography that has the power to inspire us all to feel a little less guilty without, actually doing anything. Ah, Lindsay Lohan. If it's true that our brightest stars burn the fastest, then she was a veritable supernova, in that her career exploded, leaving behind a rip in the fabric of space and time from which nothing, not even light, can escape. But hey, at least we got Mean Girls. A comedy that features one of the most hilariously over-the-top, all-out high school brawls ever committed to celluloid. If you can hear us, Lindsay, well, I guess we'll never know because according to Einstein, no information can escape the black hole of your career, but thank you anyway. And speaking of career implosions, Ezra Miller, ladies and gentlemen. Before they were busy saving lives as the Flash, or busy racking up felonies in Hawaii, hoarding guns, and holding people hostage at his compound in Vermont, allegedly, Ezra Miller was busy starring in highly regarded coming-of-age dramas like The Perks of Being a Wallflower. No one could see it coming. That's what everyone says about Ezra Miller unless they happen to pay close attention to this scene from The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which they play a little bit too convincingly. Or, come to think of it, unless they watched all of We Need to Talk About Kevin, which featured, let's just say, a kind of high school fight we don't need to talk about here. While these cheerleaders aren't beating on each other with their fists, the dance-offs featured in 2000's Bring It On absolutely count as high school brawls. They've got the same high stakes and, you could argue, demand even greater feats of physical strength. In fact, Bring It On is part of a long tradition of films depicting brutal gang violence through elaborately choreographed dance numbers, joining movies like Grease, West Side Story, and West Side Story. Don't agree? Let's see how you feel after getting some jazz hands to the face and a kickball change to the groin. This is technically cheating since everyone in this movie is actually over the age of 30, but since this fight takes place at a high school reunion, it's a high school fight. If you haven't seen the movie Grosse Point Blank, imagine if the dude from Say Anything grew up and became a highly trained assassin. An 80s teen comedy that grew up into a 90s action thriller. It's worth a watch, cause there's nothing else quite like it. It's kind of like if Melanie Griffith from 16 Candles ended up becoming Sharon Stone from Basic Instinct. Or if the guys from Weird Science grew up to become the dude from Human Centipede. Now that I think about it, I think someone needs to make that movie. In Battle Royale, a group of high schoolers are forced onto an island where they must battle to the death until there is only one survivor. If that premise sounds familiar, it's probably because it also describes the plot of the Hunger Games. If the premise of Battle Royale sounds fun, it's probably because you've been playing too much Fortnite. This movie rules hard, and to be clear, this came out before the Hunger Games. Cinema history is filled with classic rivalries for the ages. Skywalker versus Vader, Rocky versus Apollo, and literally everyone versus people who think it's cool to talk in the theater. Still, in the 100+ years since the invention of the moving pictures, no rivalry has burned hotter than Potter versus Malfoy. That's Harry Potter and his perpetual bully Draco Malfoy. What makes this rivalry one for the ages? Well, for starters, instead of throwing weak haymakers and pulling hair like most kids their age, both of them command the very forces of nature. This is probably not a great idea, considering that at their age, the impulse control part of their frontal lobe hasn't fully developed. And did we mention that the entire fate of mankind hinges on them resolving their differences as opposed to, $2 in lunch money?